This week's guest for Touch Base in Seoul is a Korean-American food writer, Eric Kim. He is currently staff writer for the New York Times, where he has been captivating readers with his recipes that come with essays on family, growing up, and life in New York. The recipes he shares are also diverse in origin, ranging from American comfort food, such as macaroni and cheese and M&M cookies, to quick and easy Korean food recipes as well, such as keranbap and sheet pan bibimbap. Eric joins us today via video from New York, now as a published writer as well, with his debut cookbook, Korean American Food That Tastes Like Home. Mr. Kim, hello and welcome to the show.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. And I always love listening to the introduction to see what pieces of this story people have, plucked. And thank you, that was really lovely. That was pretty.
Okay, so why don't you tell us your story in your own words, maybe starting from how your journey as a food writer began. I understand that you grew up in Atlanta, the son of two Korean immigrants. Were you always surrounded by Korean food growing up?
Yeah, it wasn't until I wrote this book, which took me like 2 years to write, and I moved back home to Atlanta to write it. It wasn't until I wrote this book that I really started to appreciate Atlanta and recognize that my experience as a child was actually a very Korean experience. We lived in a community that had a lot of Korean American immigrants, and there was a huge wave of immigration in the 80s, and my dad was a part of that, and then he brought over my mom later. And I think a lot of people went to Atlanta, and I could go into like the history, which is kind of it's long, but I think the LA riots actually were a big influence on immigration to Atlanta. So it wasn't until I wrote this book that I just kind of realized, wow, what a beautiful Korean American community I lived in. We had 2 H Marts, we had tons of Korean food. Buford Highway is this lovely, colorful highway that has all of the Korean American businesses, and Haeun Pungcha is this like bakery that's Atlanta based, and I could go on, but I think what really happened was I moved to New York to become a pop star. I tried to I wasn't trying to be like a K-pop star. It was more I played guitar and I wrote songs, and so I was trying to be the next Michelle Branch. I don't know if you know who that is.
Right, yes, I do know. Yes, that's a name from the past.
Yeah, name from the past. She loves it. It's sort of like there was a time in history when these young teenagers were writing their own songs and playing guitar, and they were getting record deals. I was trying to get a record deal. I never made it past like many stages. Actually, K-pop star, that show, they kept trying to cast me, and I was like, no, I'm trying to be an American singer-songwriter, not a K-pop star. Anyway, it's a joke now, but that led me to New York. And then when I was in New York, I went there for college. I studied English at NYU at first. And then I just loved school so much that I kind of dropped the pop star part. And I continued on to Columbia to start a PhD in literature. And then I totally flunked. I dropped out after my 3rd year. And suddenly I didn't know where I was going to be in the world, because since I was in 10th grade, I wanted to be a professor. And then so what happened was I took the first job I could get, which was at Food Network. And from there, it happened really quickly, actually. I went to Food Network, and then I went to this place called Food 52. I was an editor there, and I wrote a column called Table for One, which was about honbap, basically, And then
so essentially you fell into food writing then, you're saying?
Oh, yeah, I kind of did. I had someone recently ask me, when did I decide that I wanted to be a writer? And I said last year, and they laughed, and I was like, oh, that's not a joke. But, because this is all very new for me, and in a really wonderful way. I think I've always loved writing, but I didn't know that it was going to be my career. I had no idea until like this happened. So, yeah.
Right. So even as you were studying English literature, and even as you were pursuing a doctorate in English literature, I believe, you didn't think that you would be a writer, especially a food writer, you said. But were you always a good cook as you were growing up? Was food something you were always interested in?
Yeah, I think food was always something I was interested in. I watched a lot of Food Network when I was little, and I knew how to cook a lot of the American dishes that my mom didn't know how to cook. And, she knew the Korean dishes. And so this book was actually a really lovely moment to just kind of converge the two and share knowledge. Like, for instance, I don't know, from the Food Network, I learned how to use the oven. I love roasting things. And, ovens aren't very prominent in Korean households, I know, but maybe that's changing now.
Mm,
But I haven't been in a while. I'm looking forward to visiting soon. But, I taught my mom that you can make bibimbap with a roasted tray of vegetables. And
mm,
it just, because usually bibimbap, you have to like stir fry each individual vegetable and, form the colors and stuff. But like, I found that if you just roasted everything in the oven, you got this really wonderful caramelization, and the
mm.
bibimbap flavor was like deeper, and it was kind of like torso bibimbap flavor. And so I taught my mom stuff like that, and then she taught me all the jigas and tangs, and then I think because it took this book to remember that, like, wow, I've been cooking since I was 13.
Mm.
I really took that for granted my whole life, and so it's this has all been really a wonderful journey to just recognize how much food was just always a part of my life. I took it for granted. I just like never noticed it until suddenly I was like, oh, I guess that can be a job, and I got another job, and I got that,
Mm.
and then just like it just spiraled out of control, and now I'm here talking to you, I guess.
Right. What is it about food writing that you discovered? What is it about food writing that ended up appealing to you?
Great question. I was on the train at the time, commuting to work every day, and so lost. I was like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And then, but what I was reading on the train were cookbooks. I was reading Nigella Lawson's cookbooks. She's a wonderful British food writer who her essays would make me cry. And I don't think anyone realizes that Nigella isn't just a TV personality. She writes gorgeous cookbooks. And
Mm.
I was like, oh, I think I could do that. But it wasn't just that I felt like I could do it. It was like, I have this like academic background. Nigella's essays are just super um, packed with cultural context and history and etymology and all these wordy things that I was very interested in as a doctorate in English. And so when discovered that food writing could contain all this rigor, I was like, man, that sounds fun. I want to do that. Not only that, you get to eat and you get to show people, you get to like give people recipes, and so it encompasses so many intellectual interests of mine, and I feel very grateful that I've found this. And no one just like knows that they're going to be a food writer. I think you just kind of stumble into it.
Sure. What's interesting is that while, as you said, you have an academic background, you don't necessarily have a cooking background. You've never been formally trained, I understand, or you've never been to culinary school or worked in a restaurant. Was that ever a challenging aspect for you? Was that ever a concern as well?
Yeah, every day. It still is probably, but you know, I did make salads at a pizza restaurant by my house. Growing up when I was like 16, I call myself the garde manger, but like which technically is the term, but like I was making salads, and that's the extent of my restaurant training. But I try to encourage people to you know come out of that chef paradigm. It's like we think they're just chefs and they're the ones to listen to,
Mm,
but actually, it's the home cooks that I've always been interested in listening to because they have these incredible secrets.
mm,
My mom, for instance, is the best home cook. No one says that moms aren't cooks. Like
mm.
they are just as good at the chefs, even better because they've done it for so long. And so I really leaned into this notion that I'm not a chef. The furthest thing from a chef is me, but I really hope that I can encourage home cooks to also take note of their craft. Like cooking is a craft. It's just like painting. Just because you don't do it for work doesn't mean that it's not real. And of course, now, ironically, I'm doing it for work. So it's like, when do I get to become a chef? I don't know. Like, when does my title become chef? I'd like to think maybe never, but like, so I've really leaned into this thing that just, kind of like lean into the thing that you're good at, which is I'm good at home cooking. Yeah.
So right, so this has all led to your cookbook, your debut cookbook, Korean American Food That Tastes Like Home. We can already see that you put a lot of passion into it. It's come from a long road. Can you tell us about how it came about, though?
Yeah, actually, it's a great story. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I had just been laid off of one of my jobs, like my salaried job. I didn't know what I was gonna do, but luckily my book deal was like on its way, and so I got a book deal like basically a couple of days after I got laid off. So it worked out because I was like, now I have all this free time. But a cookbook to write this is like a full time job, and what's really ironic is because of the cookbook, I got all these other jobs, and then I ended up becoming a staff writer at the New York Times, and so it's just like this cycle of work that comes from work. I feel like that's like the Sisyphean nightmare of like capitalism. But anyway, I just think, you know, it came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was a book deal that really changed my life, and not least because I got to move back home, and I was really missing my family the first few months of the pandemic, the lockdown in New York. It was like March 2020, so scary, right? And my parents were also worried about their health, and I was really grateful that I got to move back home and work on this book with my mom while the world was like on fire, and we just were very cocooned in this, like, I call it like a rocking boat of nostalgia, because when you're writing a book about your family, what you're doing is you're mining from the past. And I just really, I felt like I was in a time warp, kind of. I call it like time travel all the time. It's like, it's so weird also to be a 30-year-old who's writing a cookbook as an adult, but like at your like high school desk. So I was just like writing my book. It's like my mom would come in and like bring me like tea, and like one time she brought me a mojito actually. But it was just like one of those funny things where I was like, this is so weird. I'm like 17 again.
Yes, that relationship with your mother is clearly key to this book. Can you tell us what it was like cooking with her, learning her recipes? Because I understand it wasn't all a pleasant experience, that you sometimes butted heads, that you had your own opinions. It wasn't all plain sailing.
Yeah, it wasn't because she's a feisty Korean mom. She's a tiger zodiac. This is her year. This is why I think the book's coming out this year. It's like her year, and she's, you know, but ultimately I think it was this wonderful realization that our dynamic as mother and son could evolve and could change. And I am at this pivotal moment in my life where I feel like I'm like, I mean, I turned 30 during the book writing process, and so suddenly she started to see me as, her grown-up son who can maybe teach her a thing or two about cooking. And I became less bratty, and I was like, okay, I can learn from my mom, because someday she's not going to be here anymore, and I need to know food. And so, we argued about flavor and end result and method all the time, but that actually just made for better recipes, because it was a really rigorous process where we both had to approve of the recipe. And our kind of North Star was kamchilmat. It was like, I don't really know if Korean that much, but like kamchilmat is like, my mom would say it, she was like, this doesn't have kamchilmat. I was like, oh, okay. And then I know what she meant. It's like Korean food has that. It's like the balance, and it just like grabs you right away. It's like super savory. Tanchan is like another version of this. And like, anyway, I just really learned a lot from her in how to cook and balance flavors. And I took it into my work at the New York Times, and I'm really grateful for that education. I basically had a master class in Korean cooking over the course of a year. Now I know how to make seollangtang really well, and, stuff like that.
And what's been the early response to the book been like so far? Especially your mother. How has she responded to the book?
Everyone asks me this question. I keep forgetting. Every time I call her, we're just talking about like life, and we don't really talk about. I just like forget to ask her. I was like, one day I just have to call her and be like, "Hey, Mom, every single person asks me, how do you feel right now?" I haven't asked her how she feels about the book, but so, I mean, if I'm gonna try to answer for her, what I really think is she hates press. So she's sort of like, I think she's like amused. She's like amused, and she doesn't like attention. So she's like, I don't like that all these people know my name, but it's really cool that our lives, this book has a lot of photography that's just like facsimiles of my family's real life. So the food stylists would come in and set our table, like our dinner table in Atlanta, and just make it a little prettier, So it was like we were having a regular dinner. We were all sitting around the table, but like one of us is holding a glass of wine like this. One of us is like doing, and it's like, it's really weird to see your life styled in that way. And it was wonderful. And, a great experience that I want people not necessarily to like have elaborate photo shoots like that, but what I want people to do is write down their family recipes. That's my thesis statement here. I just really want people to, if you can, write down those recipes because those are documents and those are nice stories that during the process of writing it, you learn a lot about your parents. It's really wonderful. Yeah, so it changed my family's life, I think. Not to be dramatic, but
Sure, and as I mentioned, the book not only features recipes, but it also includes essays on growing up as a Korean American, but also about your relationship with your mother and more. It sounds like a very personal project as well as a book just to share recipes with. And I feel like that's a lot of your writing in general as well. What do you want your readers to take away from your book and from your writing?
uh, I was just talking to a friend about this recently that he's writing in this amazing Mexican American cookbook called Mi Cocina, Rick Martinez, and he and I were just chatting about how the politics of food media right now in America are super intricate and complicated. And, you know, we just, I think we recognize that our books aren't just cookbooks, they're also about representation. And, it's a really big deal to see your food, your culture's food on the screen, on the page. It might be something that Korean people who grew up in Korea and live in Korea take for granted, but when you're a Korean in America, you are always just cast aside your whole life. And then, so this book for me is what I want everyone to get out of reading it is that what happens when you center yourself finally, when you center your cuisine, your culture, you gain so much confidence. And so this is an ode to self confidence and
Mm,
an ode to just finally taking a seat at the table and taking up space. And this all sounds very like hoity-toity, but like it's just so much more than food to me. It's
mm,
everything is so political. The things we eat, and I don't know. I love this cover. I just love this cover. It's like
mm.
it's tongdak. It's like dak.
Chicken.
It's basically kanjan chicken,
Mm,
but or 닭강정. Like it's like an amalgamation of all those. And my aunt Georgia, her name ironically is Georgia, and we live in Georgia. Anyway, she loves jalapenos. She
sure.
loves jalapenos, and she couldn't get warigochu in Korea. Sorry, in Atlanta in the 1980s. So she adapted, and her recipe is just so delicious. And
Mm,
my argument is that it's like this Korean American hybrid, not a hybrid even. It's just Korean American. Korean American is like a third culture to me. It's
sure.
not
Mm.
fusion food. It is what it is because of who she was and where she lived. And so I wanted to tell that story. I want people to get that idea that,
Sure.
this is a Korean book, but it's also an American cookbook.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but it's been absolutely engaging to talk to you. And I'm sure the book
Yeah,
sounds
it's such a pleasure.
equally engaging as well. And it sounds like it'll be essential reading for any food lovers out there, especially those who have a connection with Korean food. Once again, it's called Korean American Food That Tastes Like Home. And we've been talking to its author, Eric Kim. Mr. Kim, it was wonderful to talk to you today. Good
Thank,
luck with the book, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
thank you so much.